So let's talk about cracking a PM interview. A product management interview can be both very exciting because it's usually very logical and centered around problem solving, but it could also be pretty challenging and nerve-wracking because each company has their own way of assessing new product managers, and there's a lot of unexpected elements involved in a PM interview. Broadly, there are about 5 things that a company would like to test when interviewing new PMs. They include problem solving, your analytical skills, your leadership skills, your communication and teamwork skills, and also your ability to prioritize and build a roadmap. So let's talk about each of these 5 things and how companies typically go about assessing. So let's first talk about problem solving. 2 very common questions that usually come up in a PM interview for problem solving include: pick any favorite app of yours and figure out how would you improve it, right? Or the second question would be about designing a new product. Oftentimes, companies here would not pick an area that you're familiar with. Like, you will very rarely get a question like design a new food ordering app, for example, right? Companies will tend to choose areas that might make you feel uncomfortable or out of your comfort zone. So, for example, a common question that I like to ask, which I borrowed from Google, is design a navigation product for blind people. Sometimes people will ask you questions about hardware products, like design a new stool or design a new type of headphones, etc. The idea there is to think about how you react to new situations, new product problems, rather than giving you something that you're comfortable with. So let's say you are in a PM interview and you're given one of these questions, which is like, pick a favorite app of yours and how would you improve it, design something new, or it could also be like a specific app, like how would you improve Google+. So there are a couple of things to keep in mind when answering such an interview question. First, make sure that you clarify the context. That is, why are we doing this improvement? Are there any specific set of users for which we are doing this improvement? What's the objective? Is it to increase engagement? Is it to increase revenue? Is it to increase downloads, retention, etc.? So clarify the problem context. Second, clarify and take some assumptions about the users of this product. So let's say if you're doing designing a new stool, and let's say it's designing a new stool for people in business, for sitting in offices, right? So then take some assumptions about these users, like where would people in an office be using a stool, because usually they sit on a chair. Sometimes it could be in meeting rooms, sometimes it could be in canteens, which means that the stool you're designing is probably not going to be used 8 hours a day by an individual. It's probably going to be used 1 or 2 hours a day. So again, list down all these assumptions about your users that you're basing your solution or your idea on. The third thing to remember in such an interview is think about big problems, big challenges, and hence big solutions. So a big mistake that people make is, let's say given a question, how would you improve Gmail? People start pointing out small visual things that, oh, I don't like the color of this button, or oh, I think this link should be here. Now, unless that change is fundamentally altering user behavior or fundamentally increasing some metric for Gmail, usually that answer is not good enough. A really good answer in this context, that how would you improve Gmail, would be, is there a way to reduce storage? So Gmail, people are using 50 GB of storage on average. That's a huge cost to Google, given it's a free email service. People run out of their storage space as well, and then they need to purchase additional storage. So can you figure out a new way of archiving emails or a new way of indexing emails, such that it uses less space? Let's talk about Google+. It's often talked about as a graveyard for, social networks. So again, a common answer that people give in that case is, Facebook does this, so I would do this in Google+. Now, is that really going to move the needle for Google+? No, probably not. So a better bet would be to pick a certain use case for which people use social networking and maybe push users to use Google+ for that. So an example would be that a lot of people post pet photos, on Facebook, or their wedding photos, etc. Now that gets, kind of lost in the generic milli of photos on Facebook. So can you make Google Plus a destination for sharing just your travel stories or wedding stories or stories about your pets or stories about your kids, such that you're driving a huge engagement from a certain set of users. Now all these are of course hypothetical, but the point being that try and point out big measures, big ideas, big solutions, big problems to solve rather than focusing on small things. So the second thing the companies usually like to test is your analytical skills. Now, as a product manager, you'll be constantly looking at metrics, numbers, research data, survey. So it's very important and very helpful, if you're strongly analytical. So the way the companies usually test your analytical skills in a PM interview is by giving you an estimation question. Typically be, estimate the market size for men's fairness cream in India, for example, or even this is something I got asked once in an interview, which was estimate the number of flights in Indian airspace at 11 a.m., right? So how do you tackle a problem like that? So the first thing to remember while answering such an interview question is do not fret about the actual numbers, right? Because the exact numbers I don't know, you don't know, no one knows, right? It's the approach that counts. The most important thing people are looking for when you're answering such an interview question is how are you able to break down this problem, whether you're taking a top-down approach or you're taking a bottom-up approach. So let's, for example, talk about men's fairness cream in India, right? So how would you approach this problem? So if I was answering this question, I would start with, this is India's population, let's say 1.2 billion. Now I'll assume 50% male, 50% female, right? Now the exact gender ratio in India is not 50-50, right? But that's fine. I think it's making your math easy. You're making your, general point that I'm just concentrating on, the male population for men's fairness cream. So let's say gender ratio is 50-50, right? So now talking about males, 600 million male population in India. Now, what is the next sort of demographic variable that can define whether someone would be a user for men's fairness cream or not? Let's say age probably, right? So again, you could divide people in buckets by age. So let's say here I divide people by 0 to 15, 15 to 30, 30 to 50, and everyone above 50, right? Now I could have done bucketing differently. That's totally fine. The point here is that I'm showing the interviewer that I can think about which of the target segments are actually going to be users of this product. Again, I can also make an assumption that, all the male population in India is evenly divided between the ages of 0 to 80. Again, we know that India is a younger country. So probably, people in the younger age group are sort of higher proportion. But you can mention this to your interviewer, but still take the assumption of even distribution, just again to make your math easier. So then the next step would be estimating, usage among these age groups, right? So let's say 0 to 15 years, no one's really going to use it, right? Then 15 to 30 years, you take a certain percentage as an assumption that, okay, probably 20% of men are actually going to be, interested in using a men's fairness cream. Similarly, you take percentages for the other age bracket as well, right? So now, is there any other demographic element that would affect usage of fairness cream? Affordability, right? So the next cut you would take is of affordability. That of the number of people that you've gotten through this exercise, now you can assume that only a certain percentage of them would be able to afford a product like, a fairness cream product. Because it's in some ways it's a luxury product, it's a it's a enhancing product. It's not something that people are going to be desperate to use. So that will be a small percentage of people who actually have the income levels to spend on like a fairness cream product, right? So you're left with a certain number of men who you feel are eligible to be using fairness cream. Now market size usually is in terms of dollars, like dollar per year. So the next step for you would be to think about, okay, if X is a user of men's fairness cream, how many times on average a year are they going to be using that fairness cream, right? So let's say you make an assumption that on average, a user of men's fairness cream uses 4 creams in a year, and the price of each cream is 100 rupees. So that means a a user of men's fairness cream on average is spending about 400 rupees a year on men's fairness cream. This, when you multiply by the number of people that you've gotten into your target segment, gives you the total market size of men's fairness cream in India. So the next thing that people will look to assess are your leadership and your communication skills. Remember that we've learned that one of the hardest jobs of being a PM is to lead a team that is not directly reporting to you. Now that's very, very challenging to actually assess in an interview, right? So the most common way companies will try to assess it is try to ask you questions where you faced leadership challenges or managerial challenges or occasions when you had to make hard decisions, and how did you react to those. So be prepared for questions like, mention a time in a professional life when you resolved a conflict among two of your team members, or mention a time when someone was not agreeing with what you were suggesting and how did you try to convince them and what was the end outcome. Or again, mention a time when your managers or the executive team at a company that you were working at, did not agree with your suggestion. How did you react to it? What were your next steps? These are pretty common behavioral questions that you'll find in, all sorts of interviews. But I think in the context of PM, they become really important and people really care about what you answer to them. So apart from leadership, when talking about communication and teamwork, what I mean is that companies will usually try and see whether you are a cultural fit with their organization. Now, each company, kind of lays different emphasis on culture fit. Some people are very, very strong on it, that they want people who they feel will fit into the culture. Some people don't give that much importance to culture. But you might hear this term come up again and again, in an interview. So cultural fit is not really something, under your control. So if people say that we want to do a cultural fit interview, just means you need to be honest, you need to communicate what you've done in life, what you've done in different situations, whatever questions come across. And they're only trying to judge whether, they think that you would be good fit working with the other team members in their company. That's about it. So I think there you don't really need to prepare, you don't need to fret. What you could really do there is try and understand what is the culture of the company if you can. And, culture people define differently, but it usually means how people in that company work together, right? So if you can find someone in the company, someone personally, or just reach out on LinkedIn, or even ask HR to, can you connect me to someone already working in the product team, just to try and understand, what's their culture, what's the culture of building product, what's the culture of different teams working together in that organization. That'll help you give more contextual answers in that interview. It will show that you've tried to understand, about this company more, you've put in the effort. And it will also help you to make that decision whether this is, the right company where you see yourself working. Is this the cultural environment where you see yourself working? And another thing we mentioned that companies try and understand is your, skills in prioritization or building a roadmap. Again, there are different ways that companies will go about this, but pretty common question is, this usually happens in the last or, the second last rounds, is they'll give you a product, either of their own company or, something else. So let's say if you're interviewing with Flipkart, Flipkart might say, let's assume you are the product head for payments at Flipkart, right? Can you build a 6-month and a 12-month roadmap for this product with your vision, given what you know about the payments product there, right? So again, what they're trying to understand there is, how much do you understand the business right now? How much do you understand the industry? Taking this intelligence, are you able to prioritize, your goals and your vision for the product for 6 months and 12 months? Like, are you really picking those key challenges, those key problems that you think, a payments product should be solving for an e-commerce company and tackling those first? Or are you coming up with small, incremental changes that are not really going to move the needle or really alleviate any user pain point? So I think that's in this kind of 6-month or 12-month prioritization exercise. Again, it's important to pick large problems first and give your justification. Like, why are you putting this in the first 6 months versus that, sort of down the line? Any sort of framework, that actually you learn in product prioritization during this course, can be used. So very simple way to think about this is, how much impact is it going to have on my users versus what is the difficulty in implementing this solution. I think that's, even if you justify your prioritization basis those two elements, It'll show that you've logically thought about prioritizing, and that's how you've built this roadmap. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this section.